About a year and a half ago, Riot Games released Gizmos and Gadgets, a brand new teamfight tactics set that served as the turning point for the game, garnering lots of traction due to it being marketed hand in hand with the Emmy award-winning animation Arcane. Little did I know that this set was also the turning point for myself as well. This was the set that reintroduced me to TFT, reeled me in with Dragonlance, and began to occupy every square foot inside of my brain, only of which could be alleviated through content creation. But as we created more content and our rank began to rise, we found ourselves at the cusp of newfound territory. Challenger. I'm going to be studying TFT every single day, starting from day 1 of the beta environment release for set 9, and then grinding the solo queue ladder once the set is released onto the live server. The grind will continue until I can not only call myself Challenger, but an esports competitor as well. To reach the brink of sanity and to push the boundary so far of what most people think they are capable of, I need to start preparations now. My name is Kai, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of Snapshots. As we all know, set 9 is a humongous set. It is the biggest set of TFT that I'm at least aware of, and that means that the amount of preparation that we can do is basically unlimited. There's so many lines, so many comps, and so many permutations that just within the 2 weeks of the PBE being out, along with the fact that the PBE changes are going to be occurring almost every single day throughout the week, it's going to be very difficult for us to prepare for every single possible line that can exist before the set 9 actually drops. So let's go over the game plan that we've developed in order to try and expedite our ability to understand all the mechanics within the set. The first part of the game plan is to classify and organize different boards, different lines, and different compositions. This way, whenever we go into a game, we'll already have a decent understanding as to the direction or the lines that we have available to us, ideally by around 2-1, 2-5. That may sound a bit ridiculous, but that's because that is the end goal of every set. Usually by the end of every set, we usually know what boards and what lines we're trying to play around by 2-1, 2-2 at the latest. Obviously, that means that we aren't going to commit to a comp right at 2-1, but most of the time we should have a general idea as to where we're going. But that requires game knowledge. The second part of the game plan is to make sure that we develop an understanding of regions and comp combinations. Some regions in particular may actually have strong synergies with particular comps, but most regions aren't that warping in terms of gameplay, so it shouldn't be too difficult to try to find any outliers that exist when it comes to different comps and different lines that, again, synergize very well with certain regions. And finally, we need to be able to increase our understanding of the new mechanic, Legends. But I will say that I am prioritizing understanding Legends last. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I genuinely believe that the balance team is going to be able to reach a balance state similar to the end of set 8.5, where no composition is too severely OP and nothing is too severely weak. But this means that it's very likely that people at the higher end of the competitive level will probably only run Poros as their legend. This is because legend augments are supposedly designed to be weaker than regular augments. So by creating this small safety net for one of your augment choices, you're slightly handicapping yourself by creating that small safety net. But with the new augment reroll system in place, I highly doubt that you'll actually be able to mortdog yourself into 6 completely unusable augment choices. So for now, legends are going to be sitting on the back burner, but I may be wrong, and that's totally fine as well. That's just my own personal prediction. But let's rewind to the first step of the game plan: classifying and organizing composition. So how are we going to actually do that? Because there are multiple different ways to think about comps and multiple different ways to think about different lines. How can we actually categorize them in a way that makes sense, and we can actually sort of create mental heuristics for ourselves so that we know that we can play these comps if they become available to us? So when it comes to classifying compositions, for me, the easiest way to understand it is by thinking of this as a quadrant. Think of the y-axis as level 7 and level 8 boards, and x-axis as AD and AP. There are no arbitrary values in between each of these segments. There's no increments. It's just level 7 at the top, level 8 at the bottom, 80 on the left side, AP on the right side. So don't really think of it as a graph, okay? That's not exactly the way to look at it. This may sound a bit arbitrary as well, but it'll be easier to explain why the system exists. But first, let's talk about why level 7s and level 8 comps vary and what is the difference between the two. Level 7 boards are usually boards that you play when you have lost a substantial amount of HP and you need to stabilize on 7. So level 7 odds are good enough that you can find a 4-cost carry and enough upgrades that you'll be able to stabilize and be able to compete with the rest of the pace of the lobby. In very difficult and tough situations, you might find yourself donkey rolling a level 7 in order to stabilize. So some boards at level 7 are better than others in terms of stabilizing and then trying to be able to push level 8 very late compared to everybody else, but that stabilization at level 7 helps you secure your top 4. Then there are level 8 boards. Level 8 boards are when you're able to preserve most of your HP throughout the early to mid game, and you're able to go to level 8 with little to no problem. At level 8, you have much better odds to find your 4-cost 2-stars, but it does require you to have an HP lead or an HP gap or some level of maybe a large econ advantage that lets you hit level 8 with very little to no problem. Most of the time, level 8 boards are boards that you'd roll for on board 2, and at the latest, 4-5. And then obviously, these comps can be categorized by AD or AP, depending on if the main carry is an AD player or the main is an AP player. But again, this may sound a bit arbitrary and difficult to understand, so if we scroll down a little bit here, just to give you an idea, this is actually from set 8.5 comps, but because this was recent enough, literally set 9 dropped 2 days ago, on the PBE, by the way. So these should still be fairly understandable when you're looking at this, and this should be able to understand your, develop your understanding of this comp or this idea a little better. TF Nico, for example, is a level 7 roll down board. You typically roll down for this if you are sort of bleeding out. You get your 4 Ox Force frontline plus the Nico TF plus 1, right, with the Sona or the LeBlanc, and this is like your very level 7, very easy to roll down for level 7 board. Jin solo carry as well as the 80 version of this, where you're looking for that 2-star Jin on level 7 and you're trying to stabilize with a Jin Renegades board. Then you also have something in the middle. Jin, A-Soul, Mech Threats. Jin, A-Soul being, obviously Jin is the primary carry, A-Soul's the secondary carry, AP, AD. Well, it's AT, AP, relatively speaking. And then Mech Threats as well, Belveth, A-Soul, same concept as well. Both of these being level 7 roll down boards. Level 8 boards include stuff like Mech Ace, where you need the 4 Ace, you need the Mordekaiser, and Mordekaiser odds are much better at level 8. 1% odds for a legendary does not make sense. You would not try to play Mech Ace if you do not have the Mordekaiser. Enigma Squad also as well is a level 8 board as well. You're looking for that MF 2-star with the Echo 2-star as your front line to try and carry you out into a top 4. Usually into a first if you're able to 3-star the Rivet and the Vayne if you're high rolling. Then you have the AD lines as well, the Infinity Team Samira board, where you're looking for that 2-star Samira and you're tempoing the early game, I apologize, with Infinity Team at the beginning, and Warwick as well. And obviously, you might go, well, Warwick is not actually like a level 8 board, it's more of a level 9 board because you're tempoing through level 8, and Warwick 1 usually stabilizes you enough that you can look for the Mordekaiser to win out and secure like a top 2 or top 3, right? Or maybe even a first, depending on how strong the lobby is. Obviously, a lot of these comps have their own nuances and things that you have to keep out for, but regardless, the main idea still exists. It's either an AD level 8 board or an AP level 7 board or any of a combination of the sorts. Again, these nuances will become more apparent and we'll learn about these further, but in terms of simplifying how to classify the comps, this is sort of the way that I'm going to approach it. Now, in terms of regions and comp synergies, it's going to be something that's going to take time. This is my personal notes, and you will actually all have this available to you within 2 to 3 days before the set drops on the live server. I need to, make it cleaner, make it easier to read. Right now, it's a bit of a mess, so I don't want you guys to have access to this while it's very difficult to navigate. But the idea is that different regions will maybe have legends and compositions that are strong with one another and synergize well with each other. I still haven't had enough experience playing on the PBE myself. I have maybe 10-ish games. A lot of this is theory. So until we get to really get more reps into the PBE server stabilizes a bit more, hopefully. I mean, praying for the devs. They're fucking working overtime for this shit. We won't have, it won't be perfect, but obviously we'll be VOD reviewing, watching other gameplay as well, updating these notes while we're trying to find compositions, the strong legends, strong boards that work well with each other. But again, this won't be very complete, and it'll take a lot of reps, a lot of games in order to really understand everything. Plus, on top of that, a lot of VOD reviews and a lot of talking to other players and VOD reviewing and seeing what they have to say as well. But obviously, I don't want to talk about just theory and whatever for episode 1. Let's also go over a couple comps that you can play, a couple of lines that I think are really fun, and just some things to point out in general that I've noticed within the first 2 days of the PBE. So the first board that we're going to talk about is actually Bruiser Aphelios. This is the AD line, and if you've watched my stream on the PBE, you know that I'm a huge sucker for this comp. It is a very, very easy comp to play. It's very straightforward, and it's just like, it's basically going to be like the old reliable. It's like sure shots of 8.5. But the way you play this comp, and the way I think you cap out around it, is actually very similar to the way you played Warwick and reroll Jax in set 8.5. What do I mean by this? You tempo into level 8 instead of rerolling at 7. You tempo into level 8 and you try to play around the Aphelios 2, and you want the Rek'Sai 2 as well, and you just play this board at level 8, and you have a strong board already. This is a very top 4able board. But the difference is that you'll have a solo carry with Aphelios, and it can be a little difficult to win out with just a single carry. So what ends up happening is that at level 8, after you've tempoed into 4-2 into this board, what you can do is that if you end up finding a lot of Rek'Sais at level 8 on your way to level 9, you can actually just reroll for Rek'Sai 3, and Rek'Sai 3 is actually a really, really strong carry. This is sort of similar to Warwick and Jax reroll, like I said before, where you tempoed into Warwick 2, and then you would try to play for the Jax 3 after you're at level 8, and that's how you cap out. You don't have to actually build a Last Whisper on Aphelios here either, because you have Freljord teched in. And on top of that, the way that Sejuani and Ashe works is that they have a very interesting combination here, where Sejuani's passive, whenever an ally attacks a chilled enemy, you deal bonus true damage to them. So Ashe's active, or her ability rather, when she fires her cone, she actually, the first enemy she hits, she chills them. So this synergy on top of Aphelios here, Aphelios will melt like any tank here. So quite honestly, I don't even know if GS is necessary for Aphelios. I've seen a lot of Ginsu runners as well. I haven't had a chance to try out Ginsu's yet, but it does look very strong. But maybe Ginsu GS is maybe BIS Aphelios, maybe this AD line as well. they all feel very good. I don't see anything being better than the other. So once the stats come out, that's probably when we'll know what itemization is actually better for the other. But for now, my Deathblade, i.e. Runan's build is my favorite. That's just what I like to run with. Plus, the opener is very easy for this board. You end up playing Jin and Ashe. It's very, very straightforward. You just play 2 Bruiser, 2 Deadeye. Jin is a very, very strong early game carry as a 2-star 1 cost. Plus, on top of that, the board just builds itself out very easily. You end up playing into some sort of a Bastion line, maybe with Void. You can tempo with this as well. Very, very simple, very, very straightforward. You just take off the Voids later, but you keep the Brawlers. Then, there's also a different variation where maybe instead you want to have a little bit of that secondary carry. You're not hitting the Rex size. You can just play around Lux as well, especially if you play around some AP items. And you can have a aphelios Lux duo carry with, again, Freljord on the board. Very, very strong front lines with the, I believe this is Targon? No, the Bastions. Plus the Scion as well for the Bruiser. And it's a very straightforward, very, very strong line. Next, we have Void as well. This is the line that's very, very simple to play. And you really don't need to do much to play around this board. It's super simple. You just play 3 Void at the early game because 3 Void at 2-1 is really easy to hit. I apologize. These tabs have been open for centuries, so that's why they're refreshing like that. But Void is very simple. It's very easy to hit the units because Cho'Gath, Rek'Sai, and Kassadin are 1, 2, 3 costs respectively, and they're very easy to hit for an early game Void tempo. Also, Malzahar is a 1 cost as well. Very easy to hit Void at the early game to tempo with. You can think of Void as sort of gadgeting of the set, where you just tempo early game and then you can pivot out of it later, or maybe you can even try to play in it. A little difficult to win out in the vertical, in my opinion, but still nonetheless very possible. You cap out with a Kaisa 2 carry. Archangels, Gunblade, Rabadons is probably BIS. Maybe JG over Rabadons here. It's very debatable. I don't know. But on top of that, you used to play Morello Kaisa, actually, if you remember set 6, where Socialite Kaisa was a menace, and you'd go GA Morello Archangels on Kaisa, and it was like an absolute beast. You don't build Morello on Kaisa anymore because Morello got nerfed very, very heavily. They took away a lot of the AP damage that was provided within the stats of it, and instead they replaced it with just like more. I think they even replaced it with less burn. So like, it's just a utility item now, so you would never play it on Kaisa. But nonetheless, you just build damage. You just build her like you would have built Nico, or not Nico, but like, yeah, even like Nico, to be honest. I mean, I don't think Shojin is necessary to be fair. Maybe it is, but because you have Challenger Technic with Yasuo as well, she ramps up the mana pretty quickly, so you don't have to worry too much about getting your cast off. In terms of GA, she kind of dashes back and forth in terms of this lateral movement. She doesn't really go into the backline too often, I've noticed, so GA doesn't seem that necessary as well. Finally, 6 Void. Again, this is a very top 4 board, but if you can, you want to cap out by dropping, I believe you drop Vel'Koz, Kassadin, and Malzahar. Actually, maybe even Cho'Gath. I don't know. It's very debatable. But you end up just teching down to 3 Void. Oh yeah, sorry. You actually tech off the Cho'Gath as well. And you just play Rek'Sai, Bel'Veth, Kaisa with 3 Void instead. And this is just a very, very strong board. And you just cap out with Legendaries. Very, very easy stuff. Very, very simple to play. This is like the most straightforward vertical out of everything else I've seen. So give it a shot. Have some fun with it. Next, Demacia Lux. Demacia Lux is interesting in the sense that it's so simple. Demacia seems to be right now one of also the most straightforward verticals. It's not like super crazy strong in any sense of the word, but it's very like, it's like all reliable. And as of right now, because people are still testing the water, still testing different comps and different lines, Demacia is probably going to stay strong for a while. But on top of that, it also means that once people find out certain lines, certain boards that they think they can play around that aren't relying on just the, you know, a vertical line like Demacia, it's very likely that this board might not be like a very strong board. It's actually might be a top 4 board, but Lux at the moment feels really strong. Plus the fact that with Demacia, you actually have 2 elites, so you end up getting a radiant item on your Jarvan and a radiant item on your carry. I mean, it's a pretty strong board. I think my prediction is this is a very top 4 board, but this will be very contested once the live goes out because it's very straightforward, but very easy to hit as well. You also have the early game. It's a little difficult. It's not so straightforward. 3 Demacia is actually pretty weak. So you end up playing sort of this weird like Bastion sort of Teemo item carries for your Lux. The early game is still a bit ambiguous to me, but I think it's very straightforward. If you just win streak with Demacia early, maybe you hit a very early Poppy 2 and like a Garen 2 or a Galio 2, but nonetheless, you just sort of flex the early game with your AP carries, and then eventually you can tech into Demacia later on, because Jarvan is one of the best tanks of the set. But nonetheless, there also just does exist the Demacia vertical line, and this is just very strong as well. The only thing is that maybe I wouldn't play this without a spat, because you can actually item spat somebody else instead. So you can actually drop the Poppy, or maybe you can drop somebody else. So maybe you drop this because this is giving Bastion here. You get the Demacia crest, which I don't actually know what it looks like yet. There we go. Demacia crest, maybe your Shen or whatever, and then you play around, I don't know, Bastion, a Juggernaut, maybe like Kasante, Korean Santa, whatever the fuck. And like maybe this works as well. This is fine. Like, hey, you do you. Experiment. 7 Demacia, the vertical seems to be really, really strong. I actually got a chance to play 9 Demacia, and 9 Demacia feels fucking strong as shit. Obviously, it requires 2 crests, but nonetheless, very, very strong vertical, very, very fun to play. Highly recommend playing it. Lastly, let's talk about a little bit about my favorite reroll board. This is Stoner Taliyah. Shout out to the guy in my Twitch chat who named it for me. Originally, I had Boulder Shoulder, but Stoner Taliyah is way funnier. This is a reroll at 6 board, and I don't know if it's actually worth 3-starring the Swain and 3-starring the Warwick. 3-star Warwick looks very weak, just based off, I believe Emily Wang played it earlier today, and it just looks just dog shit. His scalings are all based off HP, I think, and AP, but it's just a very odd board. He just does a lot less damage than you'd expect him to, but I think there is a reroll Warwick board that does exist later on. I'm in the middle of theory crafting it, but I believe it's 3-star Jinx, 3-star Warwick, but I digress. That's a different board. But regardless, I don't really think you actually itemize that Warwick here, but you could maybe for tempo, but I believe it's going to end up itemized. It's going to be your item holder for later. But first, let's talk about the theory about this board. 3-star set, 3-star Taliyah. Why is this board any good? The idea is that Taliyah's spell, whenever she casts her spell, she knocks up an enemy. It's just CC. Doesn't sound that good. Her strong suit's her passive, where whenever an enemy is knocked up, she will actually just throw a boulder at them and just deal a decent amount of damage. So what ends up happening is that Set actually knocks up a lot of people throughout a fight. He has a very decently low mana cost at 80. It's not high, but it's definitely not that high. It's like not even mid tier. It's kind of low, to be honest. Like 80 is not, it'll cast, plus the fact that it gets hit all the time. This is your main tank for Juggernaut as well, but he basically just keeps casting, keeps knocking people up. Taliyah just keeps throwing boulders. And once you hit the 3-star set, 3-star Taliyah, and like I said before, your Warwick is item carrying here. For what unit in particular? It is item carrying for Yasuo. Yasuo as well has a knockup within his kit, and you just have knockups and knockups and knockups, and you are just hitting everybody with boulders. This board caps out at level 8. It's really, really strong. I highly recommend playing it. It's very, very fun. I don't know if it'll ever become a meta board, but I think it's a board worth trying out and playing and just have some fun with it. I think it's one of the more fun reroll boards, at least that I've noticed. Finally, the broken emblem that we need to talk about and we need to just discuss in general, this is the Juggernaut emblem. There are some units in this set that can utilize Juggernaut way too well. Juggernaut, for those of you who don't know, gives damage reduction. They take less damage as their health decreases. So tanky units really like Juggernaut emblems. And what tanky units am I talking about? Gwen is sort of the first one that sort of exists, where 2-star Gwen with Juggernaut emblem is a fucking beast. Just Titans, Hodge, Juggernaut emblem, you are going like top 3 with this board, maybe even top 2. It's really, really, really strong. On top of that, you also have Juggernaut Katarina, where you reroll at 7. You actually drop the Lux here. Lux is actually at 8, and you don't even really need the Lux, to be honest. But you reroll at 7, and you go for Katarina 3, Garen 3, Darius 3. Darius 3, Katarina 3 being your primary carries, and Jarvan 2 being your primary tank. This board is fucking donkey stupid strong. You go Archangel's Ionic on Katarina, Juggernaut. She basically, like, she just casts because she just keeps getting auto, takes like negative damage, plus a healing augment here. You are looking at a really strong turbo first. Darius 3 is actually a really, really strong unit as well. He's not as oppressive as Katarina, but nonetheless can carry you out for sure, especially with Noxus scaling. So I highly do recommend that you play this board. Also, Katarina benefits from the Noxus scaling as well. Forgot to mention that. And she's rogue, so she'll go into the backline and just wipe everything. It's really strong. If you get lucky enough and you actually play 2 Juggernaut emblems, you can actually drop the Echo and you can actually lose the Rogue. Katarina doesn't actually even need Rogue, to be honest. Her spell, surprisingly enough, just gets her within the vicinity of the backline carries anyways. So once she's casting, she'll just go pop off. So you can also try playing this comp as well. This is really, really strong. I definitely see this being nerfed before it goes live. I think Juggernaut as a trait itself is too strong, and it will all get nerfed along with the emblem crest holder. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they change Juggernaut into an elusive emblem because of how strong this shit is. Anyways, that's it for episode 1. Hopefully you guys have some fun. And I'll see you guys in episode 2, where we'll probably go over some more commentary and less about the theory. But again, episode 1 is supposed to sort of branch out and talk about everything that we're supposed to... It's like a syllabus, if you will, okay? It's a syllabus, it's the road work, it's the map work. We had to talk about all this shit, and I'll see you guys in episode 2. Take care, guys. Happy clouding.